So, we have 4 more, is that it? 4 more people? And about 1 hour, and we're good. We have plenty of time to do that. Okay, so now we have to go back to the other computer. And let's get Eva Marie on, Bob, if we can.
Okay. Okay, great. Good? Oops. Okay. So I want to give a little bit of information about radiation alignment joy, RAG, before I start, because I think if we have some like practical background, it might be easier to remember the rays that she's working with. So RAJ was a teacher. She taught children. This information is actually in the letters, so I'm not telling you anything that you can't read yourself. He said, "You've given your life to the craft of teaching, the process of which has become automatic, which at times produces aridity." She feels dry, she feels like her life has no meaning. And then he says, in a way, this is a good thing, because it makes automatic habits of response that can be liberating, thereby allowing more inner work to be done. And she also apparently has a sense of loneliness, because at one point he tells her to stand steady and know you're not alone. He also tells her that she's led a useful and fruitful life, but she still has a lot to do to enable her to lay the finger of love upon the lives and hearts of others. And he says that because she's held administrative and superintending and executive functions, which her soul wanted her to do, it's been uncomfortable for her, but she's done it, and it has produced a tendency to insulate herself from other people, although they've longed to be near her and support her. He also tells her that she has a well-managed inferiority complex. So, here she is. He says, "Your mental ray is that of the fourth, the ray of harmony through conflict, of beauty through order, and of unity through understanding." He's calling her. This, being on the line of your soul ray, will tend to bring about rapid contact with the soul via the mind if you apply yourself with diligence to the task involved. This is the clue. This is the hint to where her soul is working, what vehicle her soul is working through, because he actually doesn't specifically say it to her. Your whole life problem is therefore that of relationships, both within yourself and in your chosen field of service. That would make sense. If she's a teacher of children, there is going to be some sort of balance of relationships that needs to be made on a continual basis. This is naturally true of all, but your particular battlefield in this connection lies in the reconciling of the forces warring within your own nature and in your particular environment. It's not the Kurukshetra of the pairs of opposites wherein Arjuna sits in the middle and seeks the balance of warring forces. It is the battlefield of higher relations, those between the soul and the personality, and between what you are in this life and the environment in which you find your chosen field of service. Your personal release lies in the production of harmony through conflict, and your best technique is to produce this harmonizing influence within your environment as the result of your inner conflict, silently waged in the shrine of your mind. She has a Ray 2 soul and a Ray 4 mind. So I think there are enough clues in this paragraph to indicate to us that her soul is working through her Ray 4 mind. Your astral or emotional body is on the 6th ray, so that again you have a line of direct force from the soul. In your case, this 6th ray energy shows itself predominantly as devotion to duty as realized and to responsibility as recognized, and not so much in devotion to persons or even ideals. This has constituted a paramount balancing factor in your life. Later, he tells her what one of her problems is. And it will, I think, refer back to this particular paragraph where he says that she has been devoted to duty as realized and responsibility as recognized. She's used her will in order to carry out these responsibilities that she has observed. Your mental ray is that of the 4th, the ray of harmony through conflict, of beauty through order, and of unity through understanding. This being on the line, already read this, of your soul ray will tend to bring about rapid contact with the soul via the mind. Your problem will appear more clearly to you when I tell you that the ray of your physical body is the 2nd. So, here's a woman with one hardline ray. Everything else is soft line. She has a 2nd ray soul, 7th ray personality, 4th ray mind, 6th ray emotional, and a 2nd ray physical. This means that your entire equipment is along the 2nd ray line of force, and therefore much wise balancing is required. But how can this be done? And along what line of difficulty will the problem, which this situation brings about, be expected to emerge? I wonder if I can make it clear to you by pointing out that as the vehicles of the lower nature are on the same line as the soul influence, 2 difficulties will be present and should be recognized. The influence of the ego or soul will come so easily at your particular point in evolution that the chances are you will not recognize it. Its vibration will be similar to the accustomed notes of your various bodies. You have, therefore, to train yourself in the art of differentiation so that you can recognize at will the various tones of your 3 bodies and can distinguish when there is present the tone of the soul and react to its note or vibration. So she's got 4 soft line rays that she needs to learn to recognize. And the way she does it with the soul is by an act of the will. Most interesting. The secret of the power to distinguish the nuances of any particular line, such as your predominating line of 246, is through an increased, planned sensitivity. Again, the will. She really has to think about this. Where all lines of influences are related and similar, there will always be a tendency to negativity and a failure, except in moments of emergency, to assume a positive attitude, particularly towards the soul. What is needed in your case is more of the positive vibration of the 1st ray line of force. And to this line, your 7th ray personality is the only open door. The inauguration of a regime of the power aspect of love would greatly help you. The understanding, identifying aspects of love are yours in great measure. Much will come to you, however, if you use the will aspect of love through the medium of your seventh ray personality. I do not here refer to the will to love my brother that you have. I refer to the power to love, and through love intelligently and powerfully applied, to evoke right conditions in your environment. I would have you ponder on this and do the following first ray meditation. So for this reason, I assign her personality as working through her sixth ray emotional body, because he says that she recognized what she needed to do in terms of duty. It's also interesting because he is telling her to use a ray that she doesn't actually have in her constitution. And that will come up later in the next disciple that I discuss. Now later in the letters, he says, when the group is actually starting to not do so well, he says that her particular soul energy, her particular soul objective is to bring soul energy down from the subtler realms into the three worlds so that they can charge the brain with the result of developing soul quality so that it's demonstrated on the physical plane. So he's admonishing her, asking her to make what she actually already has in her equipment. He tells her more than once that her inner life is very strong and very powerful, but she needs to bring it out. She needs to relate to people because her isolation has put her in a position where she doesn't really relate to people warmly, and he's asking her to do that. And he basically tells her that's her life work for the rest of her time. And as near as I understand, she was one of the disciples who stayed in the group until it broke up.
When they have the... Am I good, Bob? When they have the seventh ray, they often stay. And they often complete their assignments. I've noticed that. The seventh ray personalities in the group tend to be quite steady. This woman was actually a Pisces. I wonder if it fits with somewhat with the fact that she had the second ray astral body. It's one of the softer signs, but she did have the ability to, she actually had 3 planets in Aries.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And a little later in the afternoon, Nicholas had a suggestion about something. We're going to go over that when we have a little bit of time. But right now, her ruling planet, exoterically and esoterically, I am sorry to say that. She had 3 planets in Pisces, in Aries. 2 of them were the ruling planets of Aries. So Mars in Aries, Mercury in Aries, Venus in Aries, and we don't know her rising sign. We do not. But she had some, seventh ray indicators in her chart, because the other ruler of Aries was found in the 7th sign, Libra. So she's the only one who had that. A number of them had 6th ray astral bodies, 6th ray physical bodies, a few. She's the only one who had the 2nd ray. And I don't know if we have a picture of her. We know her name, but it would be marvelous to have a video of her going about her normal business to see what a 2nd ray physical body actually does. Mm-hmm. So you've done a good job sort of intuiting what it is, because he didn't always spell it out.
Yeah, he didn't.
And this is a tough one. But he gave many, many clues. That's why a very, very careful study. You see how Elena studies this stuff so very carefully, looking for every little clue. This is needed in such a one as this.
Yeah.
The Dyna books are so rich. He said, use Dyna 1 to bring disciples into the ashram. He says, use this book to attract them into our ashrams. That's how powerful that book is. So, okay.
He also told her, this woman who taught children, that another reason she needed to become radiant and magnetic was because in her future life she would teach adults.
She would teach
adults.
adults.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Okay.
he wanted her to bring the inner strength out so that she could attract people, like you say, to the ashram.
Okay, well, very good. Well, what we'll do, we'll continue. We have 3 more, and then if there's a little time, we'll see if we can go into a couple of other things. Otherwise, we have 5 more. Oh, really? Have I misread? Let's keep going. Onward. All right.
Okay, the next disciple is PGC, Patience, Group Awareness, Cooperation. Group awareness was was his big one. And a little background on him, the Tibetan tells PGC that one of his greatest assets is his spiritual independence. But he says that this can become too much emphasized and turn into a hindrance. He also says that there's a chance that his constant reaction against receiving outer help could harm his progress. He says his extreme cautiousness might lead to a spirit of isolation and then separativeness. And he goes on to suggest that there are those who could help PGC, specifically himself, and he asks that he gives him 2 years during which PGC and he will work together. And he hopes, DK hopes, that PGC will see that the group may be of assistance to him. He asks him to abandon temporarily his habit of mental isolation, which DK tells him comes from his fear of losing time due to taking on others' mental errors. You're probably getting an idea what kind of mind this man has. And this man, although DK talks about how this man works with his hands, and we know that his profession was, he was a chiropractor. Okay, so let's read him. And he says, right at the beginning of what we're reading, you're a second-ray soul and you have a seventh-ray personality. This seventh-ray personality enables you to work actively in many ways upon the physical plane, bringing together the subjective reality and the outer form. Your feeling that there is in you an indication of a fifth-ray activity is due to the fact that it was your personality ray in your last life and is for you the line of least resistance, therefore. So this gives us an idea of why he tells him more than once to be careful of this isolating factor that comes with the fifth ray. And then he says, I will now indicate to you the nature of the 5 rays which condition you at this time. Of 2 of them you already have some knowledge, your second-ray soul and your seventh-ray personality. In many ways you know more about the soul ray which conditions you than you do about your seventh personality ray. Knowledge of this latter ray must come to you through the art of healing, and your soul has rightly led your personality into its right line of activity. This is another one who the Tibetan does not say specifically which lower body the higher bodies are working through. So we have to intuit it. Your mental body is on the 5th ray. This is definitely what I might call a leftover from the 5th ray personality in which you functioned in your previous incarnation. Your 5th ray mind gives you the inquiring, questioning nature, which is one of your outstanding characteristics, a great asset when rightly used, a major problem and real deterrent to the inflow of soul light when overemphasized. 8 years ago, it was overemphasized. Your astral body is on the 6th ray, and this is one of the factors which links you so closely to several of your fellow disciples. Both your major rays, as you will have noted, are the same as RSW. You can see how potent a part you can play in this life if the force or influence which flows through you via your emotional nature is rightly directed by your soul. And there, I think, is the clue. I think his soul works through his emotional body because the Tibetan is so strong about how he says that he can influence others if rightly directed by the soul. And it's also, as the Tibetan says, being on the same line of energy as the soul, 246, a line of least resistance for soul force is found. The group should start its healing service in the late fall. By that time, all will have assimilated and grasped the essentials of the group work. You will be even more receptive to my suggestions than you have been, for you've worked hard at the task of spiritual, acquiescent compliance. It was for you a hard task, for you're an analytical personality. You can now receive the teaching with sensitive compliance and a spiritual integrity, which 7 years ago would have been utterly impossible to you. See that you lose not these qualities. And now we find that his physical body is upon the 7th ray. This should give you the facile expression of your personality purpose upon the physical plane. I think this is the clue to where his personality is working. Therefore, in dealing with yourself, you have the following ray forces to consider. Egoic ray, the 2nd ray of love, wisdom. Personality ray, the 7th ray of order or magic. The ray of the mental body, the 5th ray of concrete knowledge. The ray of the astral body, the 6th ray of devotion. The ray of the physical body, the 7th ray of order or magic. So I am postulating, as I said, that the egoic ray, the soul, comes through the astral, the 6th ray of devotion. The personality ray, the 7th, comes through the physical body, also the 7th. I postulate that the mental body is not under the impress of either of the higher bodies because it's already so well developed. In fact, he says, he does two things with his disciple, which are very interesting. He praises him, which I think is a kind of unusual. He tells him when he's done a good job, but he's really quite tough on him. At the same time, I want to read what he says. It's so good what he says to him about what's going to happen if he doesn't really be mindful of his 5th ray influence. He says, disciples must ever remember that any overemphasis of the energies which govern the personality rays lays the foundation of the form nature in the next incarnation. In your case, for instance, an undue emphasis of your 5th and 7th lines of force in this life might produce a powerfully dangerous form nature in your next incarnation, one which would probably bring about a personality upon the 1st ray, with a 3rd ray mentality, the same 6th ray astral body, and a 5th ray physical body. You can see the danger of this combination where a disciple is concerned, and the problem with which he could be confronted. I have here given a hint as to the mode of unfoldment in connection with karmic responsibility for the future. Such a hint has not hitherto been made available to the public. In this paragraph, I've given you much food for thought.
Never heard of a 5th ray.
Yeah, he's the only one, the only suggestion of a one.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that paragraph is so interesting because it really puts in our control and power, and if we are persistent on doing the balancing that we need to do with the rays we currently have so that we develop a body that will keep us progressing and serving in the next life and future lives. I also think that he's one that was a disciple who stuck, but like you say, he has a 7th ray, and we persist.
Indeed, indeed. And the descent of the ray energies is so interesting because in the last life he had a 5th ray personality.
Yeah.
In the present life, a 5th ray mind. In the next life, perhaps, if overemphasis prevails, a 5th ray brain. That tells us something about how the rays can move down,
Yeah.
even unusual rays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we we should persist because we have only so much time. So, whoever's next.
Do you want to switch places? Oh, you're going to go, okay. Okay, how do I go down? It's the same way. Okay, we have here ISGL, and the rays given by the Tibetan are 6th ray moving to 2nd ray at the soul level, 1st ray personality, 1st ray mind, 6th ray astral, and 1st ray physical. So you can see the quite potent ray makeup, quite challenging, quite potent. And the key words, keynotes for the life are illumination, stability, and group love. And Michael, you probably know more about this man, but I know he was, believe he lived in New York and had a group of students and was writing books, stepping down the Tibetan's ideas for the public.
Well, he, just go ahead with his very interesting character, and he had some kind of ashram out in Montana, I guess. And, but he was one of the most, we can learn from his fate a dramatic lesson.
Yeah.
You say? Scottish, yes. Scottish, yes. And just so when she's talking, he was a Gemini person with Leo rising and the moon in Taurus, like so many of them, the higher disciples, moon in Taurus.
Was there an emphasized quality? I didn't see it.
No, I didn't do it. What was
We can find out. Okay, you just go ahead because we only have so much time.
Your physical body is also on the 1st ray, so you can see how powerful a combination you have for service if you can truly comprehend your problem and work with a sense of synthesis. It's not so much the mystical union, my brother, to which you should aspire, for that is progressively proceeding, but an intensified illumination of the concrete mind. The ray of your mental body is also the 1st ray. This means that your intelligent mind can dominate at need and can be far more powerful in expression than it usually is. It is always an interesting and an easy matter for the soul to control and illumine the mind when the 1st and 2nd rays are as closely related as they can be in your case. As your emotional body is, however, on the 6th ray, as was your soul when you came into incarnation, it is there that the emphasis of the soul has been, and there has been for you the line of least resistance. Now the line of least resistance should be the mind. And your major objective in life and in meditation should be the mind and increased illumination. This in order to render increased service to your fellow men. Hence the meditation which I have outlined for you and which I would ask you to follow. It is brief and powerful. So he's being asked to unite his newly evolving 2nd ray soul with his 1st ray mental body and his 1st ray personality and his 1st ray brain. As your emotional body is, however, on the 6th ray, I just read that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Your physical body is also on the 1st ray.
Yeah.
So you can see how powerful a combination you have for service if you can truly comprehend your problem and work with a sense of synthesis, synthesis being the keynote of the 1st ray. It is not so much the mystical union, my brother, to which you should aspire, for that is progressive proceeding. We read this, okay. All right, so the rays again are given. 2nd ray soul, 1st ray personality, 1st ray mind, 6th ray astral, and 1st ray physical. And I believe this was an individual who the Tibetan did indicate that he was on the verge, or his goal for this life was to take the second initiation. And I believe he, as Michael intimated, he failed in that, I believe, in that life.
Yeah. I've written an analysis of this character, and it should be on the Makara website. He was a psychologist and sort of a mythologist, an intelligent person. But apparently what he came into life with a six-ray soul. And this is one of the people that I think, one of three people who was a first-ray monad. This is my impression. Because DK keeps on telling him how close he is to Master Morya and how he had pushed his way towards Master Morya's ashram, but he had not yet done the second ray work, transferring the six to the two. So, well, he's a very, very interesting character. But the one thing will say, because we have only so much time here, is that DK asked him to write a book on Shambhala.
Mm-hmm. The way into Shambhala.
Way into Shambhala, and he just didn't do it. Instead, he wrote The High Walk of Discipleship, something like that, which is a book I got a hold of. And it's just, the sixth ray just leaps off the page. So he persisted, just like sixth ray types tend to do, with what they're used to doing. And in refusing to write on the subject that DK assigned to him, he lost a certain perspective. He persisted in his old ways, and I think forewent the opportunity to move forward, which would have only taken a couple of years, as I understand it. DK said, retire, drop your groups, take them up again in a couple of years, just go into the quiet. But he wouldn't do that, and he persisted in his own orientation.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting comment of the Tibetan, the request to, this man had attracted a quite significant group of devotees, I guess, around him, and the Tibetan told him to drop that group, that was not his form of service at that particular time, and he refused.
He could take them up again later.
Yeah.
The italicized word was stability. And with the six-ray soul still working through the six-ray astral body, he became unstable emotionally, and DK talks to him about that. He was a Gemini person, let instability do its work. He could have stabilized a great deal in the Leo energy in a new way. But he has free will, and his devotee students were very happy that he didn't leave them. As I told you before, Mr. Cosgrove, they asked him to leave, but he wouldn't leave us, Well, so that was a choice.
Okay, DHB, William Miller, second ray soul, sixth ray personality, first ray mind, sixth ray astral, and seventh ray physical. 3 life keynotes: detachment, humility, and being. And Michael has told us that this was a man who was an astrologer and whose third ray personality from his previous incarnation was more controlling him and conditioning him than his present sixth ray personality. So it's an interesting, if you feel confused about your own rays, well, take that pre-life personality rays into consideration. Perhaps they're really affecting all of us. Your first ray mental body should definitely aid you in this work, provided you ever bear in mind that insulation does not mean isolation, and that indifference does not connote an attitude of cold, detached separativeness. Your first ray mental body forms a good cooperating point for your second ray soul, and this too would I have you bear in mind. It gives you the strength of will to persist, and it should also give you the strength of will to understand not only the laws of life, but people and their need of love. Your soul expresses its energy through your mental body, and your personality force is focused in your astral body. Your astral body is also governed by the first ray. This is an exception to the general rule that the second and sixth rays govern the astral bodies of all humanity. This rule varies occasionally in the case of disciples. This combination of a first-ray mental body and a first-ray astral body is interesting and provides you with a definitely difficult problem, for the necessity to balance and to achieve equilibrium is enhanced in your case. However, it also makes possible an easier control of the astral body by the mind, if you so choose, and you do.
This was a man being prepared for the third initiation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
It should be a first ray astral body. That's incorrect. Yeah. And he has the same combination of rays. It seems that some of these advanced disciples did have the first ray astral body. And that person who was very close to Alice Bailey and was responsible for a lot of the administrative and editing work, who was RSU, she had the same things: second ray soul, first ray mind, first ray astral body. And notice that Eugene Cosgrove was supposed to have a second ray soul and a first ray mind. So the first ray mind is a very good cooperating point for the for illumination. As a matter of fact, what's really interesting, if you study the fusion formulas of the soul, you'll see that first ray fusion is supposed to have a second ray result called illumination. There's a connection there. Alice Bailey had a second ray soul and a first ray mind also. Some of these more advanced disciples, they were, I guess, working more intimately with the process and were more advanced in their initiatory status. The combination of the first and second ray were strong for them. So illumination is the key, and I guess he was one of the, well, I don't want to get too much into it, but a so-called friend of the Christ.
Yeah.
That was really interesting, and DK said, "You remind me of myself when I was trying to take the third initiation, when I was preparing for it." And then the Tibetan said, "I number myself," the Tibetan, "as among the humblest friends of the Christ." So this man reminded him of himself in two ways, and in terms of the status and in terms of that friendship with the Christ.
Yeah, and in terms of that relationship with the Christ, I recall that he encouraged him to try and make a direct alignment to the Christ in his meditation.
Yeah, maybe so. I didn't recall for right now. But he said, a friend of the Christ doesn't mean a loving buddy-buddy relationship or something. It means you're on the wisdom line. This is interesting. Yeah. Are there any questions on that one? Of course, this was one of the examples when the Tibetan later offered him praise. And instead of staying on the rails, he went off the rails. This was interesting. It went to his head or something later on. And he did some things that probably were not directly in line. He got ambitious in some way due to the praise. It's often a lot safer not to praise someone. When you praise, you never know what's going to happen.
One of the interesting things to be noted as one studies your ray tendencies is that all your three bodies are on the line of 1, 3, 5, 7, yet your personality ray is on the 6th, on the line of 2, 4, 6. Why is this? The reason is that the control of your soul is, in this incarnation, of sufficient power to evoke a reaction in all the three vehicles of the personality. And the 6th subray of each of the governing rays of the three bodies is so active that it becomes a dominating factor. Hence, you have a 6th ray personality.
It's a big hint, big hint. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will have the same subray on every vehicle, but it opens the door to the possibility when there's a certain type of relationship with the soul. So, and I think it is safe to say that for an integrated personality, the ray of the personality can work as kind of a sub-ray through every one of the personality vehicles. I call it an overlay, you know, but you know, if you have like a fourth ray personality or something, let's just say that that particular quality can show up in every one of the vehicles. And we saw him almost like mixing medicines, you know, we saw him applying certain rays where you might not think he would in order to create a certain contrary effect to the tendency of the vehicle. So the rays can be handled in that way by a master or by a disciple who realizes a deficiency or an excessive tendency in a particular vehicle. It's like this, you say, well, I know the tendency of my astral body is thus and so, therefore I will deliberately apply this particular ray as an antidote. And he does talk about, his word is offsetting. You know, he says you study your astrological chart so you can see what tendencies to offset by your will. You study your ray chart so you can do the same. But that's an act of will, and we have to really know what we're doing and what's out of balance, and then we can apply the contrary effect. Okay.
Try to stand up and read here. So now we're going to look at Regina Keller, and maybe some of you are more familiar with her. She worked very closely with Alice Bailey and did a lot of administrative work. And through a good number of the letters, DK really asks her to take some of the burden away from Alice Bailey so that she teaches more. And you know, I would recommend to you, though I'm sure many of you have done this, but I hadn't until this point, if there's a disciple with whom you feel a resonance, read all the letters in order. It's such a good exercise because you really hear the message so clearly. And with Regina Keller, it was such a clear message over and over again, which I'm sure you know many of us would experience, which is the lesson was about her physical body. And again, he returned to her physical body and asked her to care for, to strengthen, to use restraint around her physical body. And interestingly enough, it is her physical body which is left alone. The soul is and the personality are pouring through the mental and astral, but her physical body is left alone. So honestly, every letter except for one towards the end, you know, and you feel with her actually her commitment to grow, and she does respond, and you know, there's a letter that says, yes, this is the way, you've been doing well the last 6 months, you know, so you can feel that she adjusted something in the rhythm and vitality of her physical body. And he says a lot of it's connected to her racial heritage, and that there's a tendency for her to he says, the flight of safety into racial consciousness. There's something for her about shaking, detaching from her racial consciousness and her racial heritage. And it also has something to do with her physical body. So that was the main one, which was handicapped by the physical body. But he also said, please teach, please use your information that you know, please use all the occult wisdom that has come to you through your first ray mind, put it into application. Alice Bailey needs help. Do your thing, okay? And he also just, again, this is another disciple where he addresses your sense of inferiority, which is not appropriate, all right? So let's just take a look at this. Your mental body is a first ray one, and this is what makes you a real occult student. Your soul's contact is so definite and real that your mental body builds no barriers between the soul and your personality or between you and your co-disciples. Mentally, you always understand and are inclusive. I do not mean theoretically, but in fact. But your astral body is also upon the first ray, which is a unique occurrence and rarely to be found. Except we just saw it in a previous disciple. It is here that the sense of separativeness enters in, for that first ray tendency does to you two things. And yes, he continually asks her to remove herself from her isolated, lonely astral vehicle and make, you know, trust the dance of love between she and the co-disciples. I get the feeling that she very much, he says, in fact, you do this, you include, but perhaps not so much in, I don't know, the day-to-day love exchanged within the circle. So it is here that the sense of separativeness enters in, for that first ray tendency does to you two things. It feeds your sense of separativeness and thus tends to isolate you. Again, yeah, the note there. It fosters your fear of attachment. Yeah. But your astral body is also upon the first ray, which is a unique occurrence and rarely to be found. We already said this. It is here that the sense of separativeness enters, for that ray tendency does to you two things. Oh, we did the exact same thing. Okay. Thus, you are oft emotionally and astrally detached and isolated from those who love you and from your fellow men. I get the feeling that she had much love directed towards her. I think she did so much that was appreciated, and people wanted to help her and be with her, but there was some kind of fear of attachment there. Hence, there is a continuing conflict between your loving soul and your isolated, lonely astral vehicle. The solution will be immediately clear to you. Okay, we already read about the mental. And the physical body is on the seventh ray. Ponder, therefore, the interior relations and the exterior effect of your ray forces as tabulated below. So I guess in this case, her seventh ray physical also had so much to do with the capacity to organize and the brain, and less to do with the regulation of the actual physical body. Like she wasn't able to use it in that capacity. Yes? Oh, okay. You had to inhale.
I inhaled, yes.
Go for it. Okay, let's read this last paragraph. I have a word for you as you enter on a period of wide usefulness and increased service. You know well your weakness and your strength. There is little along these lines that I can tell you. Your failure is an application of knowledge to the situation. Yeah. So oft with aspirants, the main weakness lies in one particular body, and for you it is the disciplining of the physical body and an inability to apply your ideals to it at need. This is great. You treat it oft too well, and yet at times you alternate good treatment with periods when you treat your physical elemental with undue harshness, right? So we get the picture there. Why am I doing this? If you can bring about an evenness of treatment and a balanced method in your handling of your physical problem, much light and knowledge will pour through your brain consciousness. It lies in your hands, and there's little that I can do. And he comes back to that again and again. It's there for you. I can't do anything else. I've given you this information. You are primarily along the occult line. You work with energy, and actually and mentally you are fairly well controlled and coordinated. You need to work with the physical body and use it in the work you have to do, and right there is where the hindrance creeps in. You have rich opportunity ahead of you, and you have earned it. Be not sidetracked, but cultivate that one-pointedness, which is one of your most vital assets. You will note how much your soul has to do with the lines of energy, which are all definitely related to the first ray, 1, 3, 7. You will consequently be encouraged also to note how much your life of love does control your work and service. I am aware of it. Am I commending you or stimulating you, my brother? Perhaps both. Dwell much in thought upon these facts in the months which lie ahead. Yeah? So she does, I'm forgetting right now, there was a question about whether she would work in KH's ashram, and does she in fact do that?
First he tells her that she will not, and then
it changes.
At the end of her instructions she has made that transition.
So they're working in both, yeah. And with her you can feel the progression, and you can feel that she does meet the requirements. Anything else about Regina that you want to mention, or that? Regina Keller.
There's so many things about this particular disciple. It was very peculiar that a number of high disciples all had the Taurus moon. I think, Evelyn, you've rectified this chart, haven't you? Yeah. How many degrees Cancer was rising? I've got one with 15 Cancer rising at 420, but I'm not sure that it's the one you did. Can you switch over to my machine here? You see Foster Bailey, William Miller, so JWKP, DHB, RSU, that's Regina Keller, and Eugene Cosgrove, ISGL, all had the Taurus moon. That's just way beyond probability, okay? And all of them were some of the highest disciples in the group. And all of them were either working on the second degree or had passed it. So they were not the sort of the run-of-the-mill types that were working towards that. They were either on the threshold or they had gone beyond it. But for her, the physical body, Cancer and the Taurus moon, Cancer rising. So these were the issues here for her, because it was the exoteric ruler of her ascendant. And that was not the case for any of the others, because Foster Bailey had Gemini rising, and William Miller had Sagittarius rising, and who was the other one I mentioned? Cosgrove had Leo rising. But for her, you can see the physical difficulty. Now, and I can't remember, have I done this one on the internet? I think I have, but it was so many years ago I've forgotten everything. Yeah. This was a big struggle, but she broke through, finally. One of the more important disciples and a very, very close friend of Alice Bailey, and the whole Jewish problem came to a focus. And DK is constantly talking to her, because she was born Jewish, but he said, you don't really have a relation there, that's just a temporary situation, but you're taking it as if it's the real thing, and problems did develop. So a close study of her material, and of course I will restudy what I wrote when I knew what I was talking about, will pay rich dividends, I think, because this is a high disciple who had a third-rate personality. See, look at that issue, 3117, not one soft line in the personality, the only thing is the soul. So in a way she's like Frances Brown, RAJ that we just studied, who has only one hardline ray. It's in her personality. In this particular case, no soft line rays in the personality. So balance issues are really developing here. Plus the whole, guilt, and he also said inferiority complex. These are issues with second ray people. Plus add the Jewish factor to it, and it gets compounded. So study this one. It's very, 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 very good. Yes.
Taurus moon,
Oh, microphone, yes.
Okay. Taurus moon, the esoteric ruler of Taurus is Vulcan, forging the plan.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Yes, and she was the occultist. Of course, Uranus is important too, as veiled by the moon, possibly, you see. But now we will go on to the next one. It might leave us a little bit of time at the end. We'll see. We'll see.
I will just say that I was in Ojai very recently, and I was reading through the letters, and I stumbled into this little used bookstore that's new in Ojai, and just strangely enough, there was this huge section of old Alice Bailey books, and I pulled out one of them, and it was Discipleship in the New Age, and it was the first edition, and it was written, it said, to Wanda from Regina, Waisak Festival, New York City, 1955. I'm assuming it was her, but it was sort of fun to see that. Regina Keller's teacher?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think
Who was writing the letter?
Oh,
that's
Joel
Master
Kuhl,
DK.
Master DK. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
yes,
Master DK.
yes, absolutely. Great, okay, so another one that we should be quite familiar with, Roberto Assagioli, the founder of psychosynthesis. Again, when you read the letters consecutively, and also, of course, a very advanced disciple, very old dear brother of DK. And when you read the letters consecutively, you really find that the primary issue for Assagioli was the etheric body. And he said it many ways. He said the constant leakage of the etheric body, the condition of attrition or of semi-starvation of the etheric body, the devitalized etheric body. And part of that, he also spoke very much of how Roberto was, his heart was attached to so many, and hence it was unduly strained. So the other huge theme was the cultivation of the will, the cultivation, developing the spiritual will, the power of the dedicated will, the dynamic will is what he says. And he says, really, one of your primary issues here is a lack of fire. And what?
Before you go on, oh, I thought that was an underline. It was the freedom from ties.
Freedom from
that was
ties,
the
yeah, that's italicized, yeah.
word, yeah.
Yes, and he encourages him again and again. He says, by the time you're 50, which felt very early, but you should be a sannyasin, and you should be, you should be withdrawing yourself, and there should be more of an not isolation, the love can still pour out, but not all the need from all those that you feel compelled to serve. Okay, your soul ray focuses itself. Oh, and this is very interesting because he is the only one that the soul and the personality ray pour through the same body. They pour through the astral body. Okay? Yeah. And is he the only one that this is the case?
That's all I can remember.
Yeah?
It seems that he is the...
Okay.
I believe so for the present moment.
Okay. Your soul ray focuses itself in and through your astral body, and your personality ray does the same. Hence, your problem, and hence the facility with which you can relate the soul and personality rays and carry through their blended energies to the heart center. The increasing use of this line of force is one of your practical demonstrations of the future. The second thing which you need to do is to take these energies of the soul and of the personality, add them to the energy of the heart center, and then learn how to carry all three to the head center, and there blend them with the power of your first ray mind. This first ray mental power you must learn to bring definitively down into the head center by an act of the creative imagination and hold it steadily there. So that's pretty potent instruction. Your astral body, and of course this is such an important body, considering both are streaming through it, is as definitely a second ray aggregation of energies, and hence the influence of love which you carry everywhere with you. I would remind you, however, that when the soul and the astral body are both on the same ray, there is presented always an engrossing problem of balance. There will be, in such cases, a tendency to a lack of balance in the total effect of the equipment, and with this, as well you know, you have constantly to deal. In dealing with the rays which control and dominate your life, I would remind you that it is your first ray mind that gives you undoubted mental influence. There were a lot of first ray mental.
Another one of
Yeah.
the advanced disciples was first ray
a
mental.
lot of first ray, even today. This is felt most strongly by all who contact you. Being definitively in touch with your soul, which is in turn under second ray influence, you have a combination of forces which is definitely useful, both to yourself and others. Your mental body is governed by the first ray. And the physical body is the seventh ray type, but it is so controlled by your fourth ray personality that in a most peculiar sense, it has little life of its own. It is negative to an amazing extent, and this again constitutes a definite problem. And is that, I mean, was the problem around his capacity to organize, or to create the system? I mean, was more of the fourth ray chaos present, or how does anyone perceive that?
There's a lot of vacillation in the fourth ray personality.
Yeah,
And probably there were a lot of etheric comings and goings, the ebbs and flows.
yeah,
It was a weak physical body.
yeah,
And therefore, there's a number of instances in which he speaks of the domination of the physical body by the personality ray.
yeah.
In one case, a man had a first ray personality which was so strong that his third ray physical showed the signs of being a first ray physical type, because his personality was so strong. So there's how it goes. Personality ray through the physical body, soul ray through the astral body. This is generic. Monadic ray through the mental body, the generic setup.
Yeah, it was interesting because he also said to him, it's not ill health. It's not ill health. It is your etheric, it's the devitalization of the etheric body. And he said, more air and sun, less sleep, and fewer human contacts are for you the rule in the future.
Yeah, he was being drained as well.
Yeah.
by the many grasping hands around him.
You belong now to the world and not to a handful of your fellow men. That was another huge message. Good.
And kind of, Eleanor, what was he called? An initiated disciple or a disciple initiate? What was he called? Do you remember?
I think initiate disciple.
Initiate disciple, something of that. I mean,
Already the third degree, and he was moving up. He was the highest advanced disciple.
yes, of course, we know, we don't have Alice Bailey's letters, if there were any such, because he was always in contact with her. But, she was, obviously Alice Bailey was an initiate of the third degree, obviously.
Can I make some?
Yes, wait a second, let's get that to her.
Thank you. I would like to make just a couple of comments overall that the selection of the disciples here, which you have picked, showed clearly the emphasis on the will aspect, on the will, which emerges when around the second degree, because there were a number of disciples who were either taking the second degree in their life or should have taken it, and some which have already taken it and were moving forward. And every time it's emphasized the will, which this is really the energy which should be used more consciously around that stage. And this is energy which also put our feet upon the path of initiation. So this was clearly seen through the number of disciples here. Even FCD had the issue of the will, but it was a will which was more atomic will in relation to the fourth initiation, but it was basically the will aspect. That is one comment I would make, and the another one is that in relation to the focusing on the personality and soul race, you see, it was only FCD who had focus of both race in one vehicle. That signify his status also with
Yes.
that. The point is, which I have so far noticed, that the keynotes, which are the development formulas for the disciples, and the focusing of a particular ray to a particular body has a relationship to the ascendant, to the soul purpose.
Okay.
There is a definite line of energy through this quality, one of the qualities which many times is the one which is the most important quality for the disciple, and the vehicle which seem to be, as we are told, that it is always one particular body in a life which become the emphasis, and it happens to be always one of the vehicles where either the soul, usually the soul in relation to the ascendant and the soul purpose, which is linking that particular line of energies and a particular quality.
In his case, it's quite interesting because DK pointed out flaws in both his mental and physical body. There was this wonderful first-ray instrument was so good, and he wrote that great book, The Act of Will, which is so simple and so clear about how to carry out manifestation. He asked him to suppress his avidity for knowledge, even with a first-ray mind. You see, so you usually think, well, third ray or fifth ray has the avidity for knowledge. No, he had. So there was a de-emphasis there. And here he's asking him to somehow strengthen his physical body. So the emphasis was right between them. Both of the rays were there. And on either side, there was something that had to be adjusted in his case. This man was on the path of the world's saviors. He was a Pisces sun in this particular incarnation. And as you say, freedom from ties points to his Cancerian, that was the italicized word, his Cancerian ascendant. Interesting that both he and Alice Bailey had the word detachment involved in their formula. So that is the pervasive word, detach thyself from all that is around and come to me. You know, this is the integration formula for the second ray. It's all about detachment. Now, I want Nicholas to say something. He had a point which is astrological in nature, but which may be useful. And we were just looking for a few minutes to do it, so this seems to be it. Can he have the, yes.
Thank you, Michael. Just a comment that if we look at the example of FCD here, as Heidi was saying, the second ray soul was working through the second ray astral body. And when you look at the horoscope, you will try to find the planetary vehicle related to that particular ray of the soul. In this case, the second ray soul is related to either the Sun, which is a second ray component, or Jupiter, which is a second ray component. You will note their close relation in the horoscope by aspect. And this is one of the keys to seeing the interior wiring or the interior relations in your ray makeup. The closeness of aspect. So the soul is working, should we say, through Jupiter here and is able to connect with the astral body on the same ray, which is represented by the Sun.
Okay.
When you look at the personality in this case, it seems to be focused in the moon, which is a fourth ray vehicle, down below, which, as you can see, is also aspecting the Sun very closely. Both of the soul and personality on the second and the fourth rays are working through that Sun, representing the second ray astral nature. So this will be a key, and it is repeated in the other patterns of other disciples. So this is perhaps something of use when you contemplate your own interior wiring.
Closeness of aspect.
There is more to say about this, but
Yes.
the time is brief, so
That's the essence of
that's
it.
the essence right now. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Nicholas. You know, it's quite impossible to separate rayology from esoteric astrology, as probably you have seen. There's a lot of astrological knowledge to have, and you can say, well, can't I just stick to the rays and figure it out? But the added enrichment that comes from knowing the astrological factor that support the rays, that work through the rays, and so forth, and vice versa, it's like the right and left hand, and you just don't want to have one or the other. So some of these things have to be brought in, and it will require from some a bit of additional study. But it's worth it, you know. Being on the second ray, DK has given us the method. Are there any further questions here? We're getting near lunchtime now. You see what we've been trying to do, and we've used examples of some sort of middle-of-the-road disciples and some quite prominent disciples in that whole movement. They all have issues, don't they? And if you look at every one of us, we do have our issues. The question is, do we know what they are? We don't have the master to point them out right now, but he'll be one of the externalizing masters, I do believe, because he, you know, he's such a healer, and he did say of the healing group that qualification to be a member of that group meant that you had a particularly resonant connection to the physical plane. So this will, you know, and sometimes when you look at the pictures of him, or, you know, how, he says, I understand a fairly good likeness, you think there's a lot of Gemini there, of course, because the whole movement is ruled by Gemini, but you also see the Taurus energy. You also see very strong, grounded ability to work with vitality and the substance aspect. So I think he'll be one of those externalizing masters, my guess here, and probably some of us will be directly instructed by the master in future incarnations. Nevertheless, we are on our own at the moment, rather on our own. So the question is, can we put our finger on what he would put his finger on? You know, say, you know, if he were speaking to us directly, as some imagine he does, I mean, you know, and maybe he does, what would he isolate in our character as that next particular issue that had to be addressed if there was going to be general progress? And then, once it was isolated in our own mind, could we then know what was the antidote and what is the approach to take in order to work through it? These are very, very practical questions. Many of us are interested in, you know, great big things and, you know, big picture and all that kind of thing. But what's that next little nitty-gritty personality issue that's stopping real progress? And there can't be anybody here that doesn't have one, you know. So that I would recommend that you think about, you know, and when we come back, we're going to be dividing into groups. We must be out of here at 3 o'clock because there's a tremendous resettling and reshuffling that goes on. So we'll have to condense and compress what we do after lunch. So let's be on time when we come here. And you'll be able to do some work in your groups, thinking about your ray structure and why it is, fifth ray mudra. Okay, thinking why it is that a particular ray for you, soul or personality, works through a particular vehicle, and what problems that may create, which have to be dealt with. This will be most interesting, and will have to be kind of to the point on the matter. Are there any questions? Okay, well then you can, any comments from the team? Right after lunch, it says 1:30, so let's say 1:27, something like that. Like odd numbers, you know. Okay, so you come back, you all come back now.